My name is Nettie, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew my daughter better than anyone else in this world. I was sitting in my kitchen just last month, looking out at the garden I had tended for 15 years, remembering how Robert and I used to watch Madison play among the flower beds when she was little. Those were the days when family meant everything, when love felt unconditional and pure. But sometimes the people you love most can surprise you in ways you never imagined. And what I accidentally overheard that afternoon changed everything I thought I knew about my own child. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button if you are ready for a story that will remind you why we should never underestimate the strength of a mother. And do not forget to subscribe, because I have so many more stories to share with you. This house has been my sanctuary for 17 years now. Robert and I bought it back in 2008, right before the market crashed. We got lucky with the timing snagging this beautiful colonial-style home, with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and the most gorgeous wraparound porch you have ever seen. The neighborhood was perfect for raising Madison with tree-lined streets and families who actually knew each other names. I remember the day we first walked through the front door. Robert was carrying 3-year-old Madison on his shoulders, and she was giggling as her little hands touched the ceiling fan in the hallway. We knew immediately this was where we wanted to build our life together. Every room held a purpose. Every corner would soon hold a memory. The master bedroom, where Robert and I would plan our future. The guest room that would eventually become Madison's sanctuary as a teenager, and the basement that Robert turned into his workshop. Those were the golden years. Madison was Daddy's a little girl, but Mama's best friend. She would help me plant tulips every spring and bake chocolate chip cookies every Sunday after church. Robert would come home from his job at the insurance company, and we would all sit on that wraparound porch, watching the sunset and talking about our dreams. Madison wanted to be a teacher back then, said she loved helping people learn new things. But life has a way of changing everything you think you know. 3 years ago, Robert suffered a massive heart attack at work. Gone at 55, just like that. The doctors said it was quick that he did not suffer, but I sure did. Suddenly, this big, beautiful house felt enormous and empty. The silence was deafening. Madison was 29, then already married to Tyler for 2 years, and they had just welcomed little Emma into the world. At first, Madison was my lifeline. She came over every few days, bringing Emma and just sitting with me while I grieved. We would look through photo albums and share stories about Robert that made us both laugh and cry. Tyler seemed understanding during those early months, always offering to help with yard work or small repairs around the house. I thought I was lucky to have such a caring son-in-law. The house itself was our pride and joy. We had spent years updating everything. The kitchen had beautiful granite countertops that Robert installed himself. Custom cabinets that cost us a fortune but were worth every penny. The hardwood floors throughout the main level were original 1950s oak that we had refinished. The backyard was my masterpiece, though, with rose gardens, a vegetable patch, and a small greenhouse where I grew herbs year-round. By the time I was ready to face the world again, Madison had given birth to Jake, and suddenly I was grandmother to 2 beautiful babies. Emma was a curious toddler with Robert's eyes, and Jake was this peaceful baby who rarely cried. Being their grandmother gave me purpose again. I would babysit whenever Madison needed, and they would spend weekends with me, filling this house with laughter once more. But somewhere in those 3 years, things started shifting in ways I did not recognize at first. Madison seemed busier, more stressed about money, even though Tyler worked in sales and she had her real estate license. They moved into a bigger house in a more expensive neighborhood, and I noticed they talked a lot about property values and investments. Tyler developed this habit of commenting on houses we drove past, always calculating what they might be worth. Looking back now, I see the signs I missed. Madison started asking questions that seemed caring at the time but felt different in hindsight. Questions about my health, my finances, whether I felt safe living alone in such a big house. Tyler would walk through my rooms and comment on how much space I had, how expensive it must be to heat and cool such a large place. I chalked it up to normal concern from a daughter who loved me. After all, I was getting older, and they just wanted to make sure I was taking care of myself. I had no idea they were taking inventory of everything they thought would someday belong to them. The first real warning sign came about 6 months ago during one of our regular Sunday dinners. Madison and Tyler had brought the kids over, and we were all sitting around my dining room table, the same table where Robert and I had hosted countless family gatherings. Emma was telling me about kindergarten, and Jake was making a mess with his mashed potatoes, when Tyler made a comment that stuck with me. He looked around the dining room with its crystal chandelier and antique china cabinet, and said something like, "Nettie, this is such a beautiful house, but do not you think it might be getting to be too much for you to handle alone?" Madison jumped in quickly, agreeing with him, saying she worried about me climbing stairs and maintaining such a large property by myself. I remember feeling confused because I had never complained about the house being too much work. Sure, I hired a lawn service for the heavy yard work, and I had a cleaning lady come twice a month, but I was perfectly capable of managing everything else. I was only 58, not 88. I still drove myself everywhere, managed my own finances, and maintained an active social life with my neighbors and church friends. But Madison seemed genuinely concerned, so I tried to see it from her perspective. Maybe I was being stubborn about accepting help. Maybe they were just looking out for my best interests. She started bringing up the idea of downsizing more frequently after that, always couched in terms of my comfort and convenience. "Mum, think about how much easier life would be in a nice condo, where someone else handles the maintenance," she would say. Or Tyler would mention how much money I could save on utilities and property taxes in a smaller place. They made it sound like they were doing me a favor by suggesting I give up the home I loved. The phone calls started changing too. Madison used to call just to chat, to tell me about the kids, or ask for my advice about something. But increasingly, our conversations turned to practical matters. She wanted to know about my insurance policies, whether I had updated my will recently, what my monthly expenses were. She said it was because she wanted to help me organize my paperwork, make sure everything was in order, just in case. I found myself feeling defensive about things I had never questioned before. Why should I have to justify living in my own home? Why was my perfectly normal lifestyle suddenly being scrutinized as if I were some fragile old woman who could not make her own decisions? But every time I tried to express these feelings, Madison would get emotional and say she was just trying to be a good daughter, that she could not bear the thought of something happening to me when I was all alone. Tyler was more direct in his approach. He would bring up stories about elderly people who had fallen and laid helpless for hours, or mention crime statistics in our neighborhood that I had never heard about. He seemed to know an awful lot about property values in our area, too casually mentioning how much houses similar to ours had sold for recently. The strangest incident happened when Madison asked for a spare key to my house. She said it was just in case of emergency, that she would feel better than knowing she could check on me if I did not answer my phone. It seemed like a reasonable request from a caring daughter, so I had one made for her. But something about the way Tyler smiled when she told him about the key made me uncomfortable, though I could not put my finger on why. My neighbor Sarah, who had lived across the street for 12 years, started making comments too. Not about my ability to live independently, but about the changes she noticed in Madison and Tyler. Sarah had always been fond of my daughter, but she mentioned that Madison seemed different during her visits. More business-like somehow. Sarah said it looked like Madison was always taking notes on her phone when she walked through my house, and Tyler seemed more interested in looking at my belongings than playing with his children. I tried to dismiss Sarah's observations as neighborhood gossip, but they planted seeds of doubt that kept growing. I started paying closer attention to my daughter's behavior, and what I noticed made me increasingly uneasy. Madison would open closets and look inside, comment on furniture pieces she had never shown interest in before, and ask questions about family heirlooms that seemed odd coming from someone who would naturally inherit these things someday anyway. The financial pressure they were under became more obvious too. Tyler's sales numbers were apparently down, and Madison's real estate business was struggling in a competitive market. They were stressed about their mortgage payments and had mentioned needing to cut back on expenses. I offered to help them financially, but they refused, saying they would figure it out themselves. At the time, I thought they were being proud and independent. Now I wonder if they already had a different solution in mind. Everything started falling into place about 2 months ago, when I began to see a pattern in their behavior that I could no longer ignore. It started with Madison's phone calls becoming more frequent but less personal. She would ask specific questions about my daily routine, whether I had any upcoming doctor appointments, how I was feeling physically. But when I tried to steer the conversation toward the grandchildren or her work, she seemed distracted and eager to get off the phone. Then I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. I was using Madison's laptop to look up a recipe when she forgot it at my house after one of our Sunday dinners. A browser tab was still open to a website for assisted living facilities in our area. Not just any facilities, but specifically ones that advertised affordable care for seniors with memory issues. I stared at that screen for a full 10 minutes, trying to understand why my daughter would be researching these places. When I asked her about it later, Madison became flustered and gave me some story about researching options for her friend's grandmother who was having health problems. But something about her explanation felt rehearsed, like she had been preparing for this question. And why would she be looking at affordable places when her friend's family was quite well off? The pieces really started coming together when I overheard a phone conversation between Madison and someone I assumed was Tyler. I was in my garden pruning roses near the kitchen window when Madison's voice carried outside. She was saying something about getting Mum settled somewhere else, and the timing needs to be right so she does not get suspicious. My hands froze on the pruning shears as I realized she was talking about me. I crept closer to the window, my heart pounding, and heard her say that they needed to be patient and make it seem like it was my idea to move. She mentioned that Tyler had been researching the legal aspects of the situation and that they needed to document any signs that I was having trouble managing on my own. The conversation ended before I could hear more, but I had heard enough to know that my worst fears were starting to come true. From that day forward, I began paying attention to their behavior with the intensity of a detective. I noticed Tyler taking photos of different rooms in my house, with his phone always when he thought I was not looking. Madison would make comments about how difficult it must be for me to keep up with housework, or remember all my medications, even though I had never given any indication that these things were problems for me. They started visiting more frequently, but for shorter periods of time. Their visits felt more like inspections than family time. Tyler would walk through the house, running his hands along furniture and examining appliances as if he were appraising their value. Madison would ask leading questions about whether I had been feeling confused or forgetful lately, whether I was having trouble sleeping or eating properly. The most disturbing discovery came when I found a business card in my kitchen junk drawer after one of their visits. It was for a real estate agent who specialized in compassionate sales for families in transition. I had never seen this card before, and I certainly had not requested information from any real estate agents. Someone had placed it there deliberately, probably hoping I would find it and think it was a sign that I should consider selling. I called the number on the card, pretending to be interested in their services, and learned that someone matching Tyler's description had already contacted them about a potential listing in my neighborhood. They would not give me specific details, but the agent mentioned that the caller had said the homeowner might be ready to sell soon due to changing family circumstances. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had experienced since Robert's death. My own daughter, the little girl I had raised and loved unconditionally, was actively plotting to remove me from my home and my independence. And Tyler, who I had welcomed into our family and trusted with my daughter's happiness, was apparently the mastermind behind this scheme. But the worst part was not just that they were planning to manipulate me into giving up everything I had worked for. The worst part was how calculated and patient they were being about it. This was not a spontaneous idea born from genuine concern about my welfare. This was a long-term strategy designed to make me doubt my own capabilities so they could swoop in and take control of my assets. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how I had missed the signs for so long and what I was going to do about it. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to tell them I knew what they were up to and demand that they stop. But I realized that direct confrontations would only put them on guard and force them to accelerate their timeline or become more devious in their methods. The moment that changed everything happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon in late September. Madison and Tyler had come over for what I thought was a normal family visit. Emma and Jake were playing in the backyard while I prepared snacks in the kitchen. The adults were supposed to be relaxing in the living room, and I assumed they were watching the children through the patio doors. I had been feeling unusually tired that day, probably from all the stress of wondering what they were really up to. So I decided to rest on the living room sofa for a few minutes. I positioned myself so it would look like I was napping with my back to where Madison and Tyler were sitting and closed my eyes. What I heard over the next 20 minutes destroyed any remaining doubt about their intentions. At first, they spoke quietly, probably thinking I was asleep. Tyler started by saying they needed to move forward with their plan soon because their financial situation was getting worse. Madison agreed, saying she had been laying the groundwork for weeks and thought I was starting to doubt my ability to live alone. Then Tyler said something that made my blood run cold. "Once we get her moved out, we can put the house on the market immediately," he said. "I have already talked to 3 different real estate agents, and they think we can get at least $450,000 for it, maybe more if we stage it right." Madison replied that she felt bad about putting me in such a cheap nursing home, but Tyler reminded her that they could not afford anything better until the house sold and they got control of my other assets. They discussed their strategy in detail, talking about how they would convince me that I was becoming forgetful and unsafe living alone. Madison mentioned that she had been keeping notes about any small mistakes I made, or times when I seemed confused about something, planning to use these as evidence that I needed supervised care. Tyler had researched the legal process for getting conservatorship over an elderly person and felt confident they could make a case if I resisted their suggestions. But the conversation that followed was even more heartbreaking. Madison actually said, "Sometimes I think it would be easier if she would just have a small accident or something, nothing serious, but enough to prove that she cannot take care of herself anymore." Tyler laughed and said that accidents could be arranged if necessary, though he thought psychological manipulation would be more effective and less risky. They talked about which of my belongings they would keep and which they would sell. Madison wanted my grandmother's china and jewelry, while Tyler was interested in Robert's tools and my car. They discussed getting rid of most of my furniture and personal items, saying that nursing home rooms were small and I would not need much. Madison mentioned that they would tell me it was better for my adjustment if I did not bring too many reminders of my old life. The most devastating part came when Tyler asked Madison if she thought she would feel guilty about essentially stealing my life from me. Madison was quiet for a moment, then said, "Look, she's going to end up in a nursing home eventually anyway. We are just speeding up the timeline so we can benefit from her assets while we are young enough to enjoy them. She will be fine once she gets used to the idea. Tyler pointed out that once I was settled in the nursing home, they would not have to visit very often, maybe just on holidays or special occasions. Madison agreed, saying it would actually be a relief not to have to worry about me anymore. They talked about how they would use the money from selling my house to pay off their debts and maybe take a family vacation they had been dreaming about. I listened to my own daughter and son-in-law discuss destroying my independence and freedom as if they were planning a grocery list. They had reduced me to nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and my assets. Every expression of concern they had shown me over the past months had been nothing but manipulation designed to wear down my confidence and make me compliant with their wishes. The conversation continued with them setting a timeline for their plan. They wanted to start the process within the next month, beginning with a campaign to convince me that I had been having memory problems and safety issues. Tyler had researched several low-cost nursing homes and had already visited a couple to see what they offered. Madison planned to start being more aggressive about pointing out my supposed limitations and suggesting that I needed help with daily activities. They even discussed how they would handle my resistance if I figured out what they were doing. Tyler suggested that they could claim I was becoming paranoid and delusional, which would actually support their case for getting legal control over my affairs. Madison thought they should involve my doctor somehow, maybe by telling him they were concerned about changes in my behavior and asking him to evaluate my mental competency. By the time they finished talking and moved on to other topics, I felt like I had been gutted. These people I loved and trusted had been plotting against me for months, maybe longer. They saw me not as a beloved mother and grandmother, but as a resource to be harvested when the timing was right. Everything I had worked for, everything Robert and I had built together, was nothing more than dollar signs to them. But as I lay there pretending to sleep, something else began growing alongside my devastation. Anger. Pure, righteous anger at the audacity of what they were planning to do to me. And with that anger came a crystal-clear realization that I was not going to be anyone's victim. If they wanted to play games with my life and my future, they were about to discover that this 58-year-old woman was much smarter and stronger than they had calculated. I spent the rest of that weekend in a strange state of clarity, mixed with fury. After Madison and Tyler left with the children, promising they would see me soon with fake smiles and fake hugs, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and started planning my response. They thought they were dealing with some helpless old woman who could be manipulated and controlled. They were about to learn how wrong they were. My first step was to call my attorney, David Morrison, who had handled Robert's estate and our wills. I scheduled an appointment for Monday morning and told him I needed to discuss some family issues that required legal advice. David had known our family for years and had always been straight with me, so I knew I could trust him with the truth about what was happening. Monday morning, I sat in David's office and told him everything I had overheard. His expression grew darker with each detail I shared. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disgust. "Nettie," he said, "what you are describing could constitute elder abuse and fraud if they actually follow through with their plans. But the good news is that you have the power to protect yourself, and I am going to help you do it." David explained my rights as the sole owner of my property and assets. Since I was mentally competent and financially independent, no one could force me into a nursing home or take control of my affairs against my will. However, he warned me that if Madison and Tyler were determined enough, they could make my life very difficult with false claims and legal challenges that would be expensive and emotionally draining to fight. That is when I made the decision that would change everything. I told David I wanted to sell my house immediately and relocate somewhere my daughter and son-in-law would not expect. I wanted to beat them at their own game by taking away the very asset they were plotting to steal from me. David was initially surprised by my decision, but when I explained my reasoning, he understood and agreed to help. We spent the next 2 hours planning my strategy. David recommended a real estate agent who specialized in quick sales and could be trusted to keep the transaction confidential until it was complete. He also helped me research independent senior living communities in nearby cities where I could have my own apartment, but access to services if I ever needed them in the future. The process moved faster than I had expected. By Wednesday, I had met with the real estate agent Sarah Chen, who was professional and understood my unique situation. She assured me that we could have my house on the market within a week and likely find a buyer within 30 days if we priced it competitively. The housing market in our area was strong, and properties like mine were in high demand. While Sarah worked on preparing the listing, I started the emotional process of deciding what to take with me and what to leave behind. I walked through each room, touching furniture that Robert and I had chosen together, looking at photographs that chronicled our life as a family. Some items were too precious to abandon, like my grandmother's rocking chair and the photo albums documenting Madison's childhood. Others, like the heavy dining room set, and most of the furniture would have to stay with the house. I found a beautiful senior living apartment in Riverside, about 45 minutes from my current home. It was in a lovely community, with a golf course, walking trails, and an active social calendar. Most importantly, it offered the perfect balance of independence and security. I would have my own kitchen living space and bedroom, but there was a dining room where I could eat with other residents if I chose, and medical assistance was available if needed. The hardest part was keeping my activities secret from Madison and Tyler. They called and visited regularly, still playing their roles as concerned family members while secretly plotting my downfall. Every conversation felt surreal because I knew they were studying my responses for signs of weakness they could exploit later. I had to act normal while my entire world was shifting beneath their feet. I told my neighbor Sarah what I was planning, and she was initially shocked but then completely supportive. She had never liked the way Tyler looked at my house like he was measuring it for new curtains, and she agreed that Madison seemed different than the sweet girl who used to live next door. Sarah offered to help me pack and promised to keep my secret until I was ready to reveal it. The buyers for my house were a young family with 2 small children, and I felt good about passing my home on to people who would love it and fill it with happy memories like Robert and I had done. They offered asking price and wanted to close within 3 weeks, which was perfect for my timeline. During this period, Madison actually accelerated her campaign to convince me I was declining. She started pointing out every small thing I forgot or any time I seemed tired. When I mentioned that I had misplaced my reading glasses, she made a big deal about how concerning that was and suggested I should talk to my doctor about memory problems. When I took a little longer than usual to get up from my chair, she asked if I was having trouble with my balance and mobility. The irony was incredible. Here I was executing a complex plan that required coordination with lawyers, real estate agents, financial advisors, and moving companies, while my daughter was trying to convince me that I could not handle basic daily activities. I was managing multiple timelines, making important decisions, and handling significant financial transactions, all while maintaining the facade that nothing unusual was happening. 2 weeks before my planned moving date, I had my new apartment ready and had arranged for a moving company to transport my essential belongings. I had opened new bank accounts in Riverside and transferred most of my assets there. I had even found a new doctor and arranged for my medical records to be transferred. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The night before the closing on my house, I sat on my front porch one last time, remembering all the evenings Robert and I had spent there watching the sunset and planning our future. I felt sad about leaving these memories behind, but I also felt proud of myself for taking control of my destiny instead of letting others decide my fate for me. Tomorrow, Madison and Tyler would discover that their months of scheming had been for nothing. The house they thought they were so cleverly maneuvering to control would belong to someone else, and the woman they had underestimated would be starting a new chapter of her life on her own terms. Moving day arrived on a crisp October morning, and I woke up feeling more excited than nervous about what lay ahead. The movers arrived at 8 in the morning sharp, and I had everything packed and ready to go. My most precious belongings fit into just 20 boxes and a few pieces of furniture that held special meaning. It was amazing how little I actually needed from a lifetime of accumulating things. Sarah came over to say goodbye and help me with the final details. She was emotional about seeing me leave, but she understood why I had to do it. We had been neighbors and friends for over a decade, and she promised to visit me in my new home once I was settled. I gave her my new address and phone number, swearing her to secrecy until I was ready to contact Madison myself. The real estate closing went smoothly. David met me at the title company, and within an hour I had signed away ownership of the house where I had expected to live for the rest of my life. The check from the sale was deposited directly into my new bank account, giving me complete financial independence and the freedom to make whatever choices I wanted about my future. As the movers loaded the last box into their truck, I walked through my empty house one final time. Each room echoed with memories, but I did not feel the overwhelming sadness I had expected. Instead, I felt liberated. This house had been my prison for the past few months, a place where I constantly had to defend my right to exist in my own space. Now it was just an empty building that would soon belong to a family who would appreciate it. The drive to Riverside took less than an hour, and my new apartment was everything I had hoped it would be. Bright and cheerful, with large windows overlooking the community's garden area. The kitchen was small but efficient, perfect for cooking meals for one person. The living room was cozy, and the bedroom was just the right size for my queen bed and dresser. The movers helped me arrange my furniture, and by late afternoon, my new home was starting to feel comfortable. I had brought my grandmother's rocking chair, which fit perfectly by the living room window. My favorite photographs were displayed on the mantel above the electric fireplace. The apartment felt like a fresh start, not a consolation prize. But there was one more thing I needed to do before I could truly relax and enjoy my new independence. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I wrote the longest letter of my life. It was addressed to Madison, and it contained everything I needed her to know about what I had discovered and why I had made the choices I had made. In the letter, I told her that I had overheard every word of her conversation with Tyler that Saturday afternoon. I described how betrayed and heartbroken I felt to learn that my own daughter saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience standing between her and my assets. I explained that I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions about where and how to live, and that I would not tolerate being manipulated or deceived by anyone, including family. I also told her about my new life in Riverside, making it clear that I was thriving and independent, not hiding away in shame. I gave her my new address and phone number, but I also set clear boundaries about what kind of relationship we could have going forward. If she wanted to be part of my life, she would have to prove that she could respect me as an autonomous adult, not treat me like a burden to be managed. The letter was 4 pages long when I finished it, and I read it 3 times before I was satisfied with every word. It was firm, but not cruel disappointed, but not hopeless. I wanted Madison to understand the consequences of her choices, while leaving the door open for redemption, if she was truly willing to change. The next morning, I drove back to my old neighborhood one last time. The new owners were not moving in for another week, so the house stood empty with a big "sold" sign in the front yard. I taped my letter to the front door right at eye level, where Madison could not possibly miss it when she came for her next visit. Standing on that porch where I had spent so many happy hours, I said goodbye to the woman I used to be, and hello to the person I was becoming. The scared, confused woman who had been questioning her own judgment was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her own worth and would not allow anyone to diminish it. I drove back to Riverside feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone was turned off, sitting in my purse, because I wanted a few days of peace before dealing with whatever reaction my letter would provoke. I spent the rest of the week exploring my new community, introducing myself to neighbours, and settling into routines that belonged entirely to me. The community centre offered water aerobics classes, book clubs, and volunteer opportunities. The library had a section dedicated to local history that fascinated me. There was a coffee shop within walking distance where I could sit and read, or just watch people go about their lives. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself, instead of constantly worrying about what others expected from me. 3 days after I left the letter, I finally turned my phone back on. There were 17 missed calls from Madison and 12 voicemail messages. I listened to them in chronological order, and they told the whole story of her discovering what had happened. The first few messages were confused and panicked. The middle ones were angry and accusatory. The last few were tearful and pleading. But what struck me most was that even in her distress, Madison's first concern was not about my safety or well-being. Her first concern was about the house and what my decision meant for her financial plans. It confirmed that I had made the right choice in protecting myself from people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. The phone calls from Madison started as soon as she found my letter, but I was not ready to answer them yet. I needed time to settle into my new life and gain perspective on everything that had happened. The voicemails she left told a story of shock denial, anger, and eventually something that might have been the beginning of understanding. In the first message, she sounded completely bewildered. "Mum, I do not understand what happened. I came to check on you and the house is empty, and there is a sold sign in the yard. Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me back immediately." Her voice was high and stressed, and I could hear Tyler in the background asking what was going on. By the third message, she had clearly read my letter thoroughly. Her tone had shifted from confusion to defensive anger. "Mum, I cannot believe you would do something so drastic without talking to us first. We were only trying to help you, and now you have made this huge decision that affects the whole family. Tyler and I never meant to hurt you. You completely misunderstood our conversations." The messages that followed were a mixture of blame, justification, and attempts at emotional manipulation that only reinforced my decision to distance myself. Madison accused me of being selfish and irrational. She claimed that I had eavesdropped on private conversations and taken them out of context. She said I had destroyed the family over a misunderstanding, and that she could not believe I did not trust her enough to talk things through. But by the 10th message, something had changed in her voice. She sounded smaller, somehow less certain of her position. "Mum, I have been thinking about everything you wrote in your letter. Maybe Tyler and I got carried away with worrying about your future. Maybe we made some mistakes in how we approached things, but please do not cut us out of your life completely. Emma and Jake miss their grandmother." I waited a full week before calling her back, and when I did, our conversation was unlike any we had ever had. Madison cried through most of it, apologizing for hurting me, and claiming that she had never realized how her actions seemed from my perspective. She said Tyler had been pushing the nursing home idea more than she had, and that she had gotten caught up in his fears about their financial future. I listened to her explanations, but I also made it clear that sorry was not enough to rebuild the trust that had been broken. I told her that if she wanted any relationship with me going forward, there would have to be significant changes in how she treated me. No more questioning my competence, no more discussions about my living arrangements unless I brought them up, and absolutely no more scheming behind my back about my assets or my future. The conversation with Tyler was much more difficult. When he finally called me himself, 2 weeks after Madison's first attempt, he was still defensive and argumentative. He claimed they had never intended to force me into a nursing home, that they were just exploring options in case I ever needed care in the future. He said I had overreacted to innocent conversations and made decisions that hurt everyone in the family unnecessarily. I cut that conversation short and told him that until he could acknowledge what he had actually done and take responsibility for his behavior, we had nothing to discuss. I also made it clear that any future relationship between us would depend entirely on how he treated his wife and children, because I would not tolerate having my daughter manipulated any further. The situation with my grandchildren was the most heartbreaking part of the whole ordeal. Emma was old enough to understand that something had happened between the adults in her family, even if she could not grasp the details. Jake was too young to understand anything, except that he could not visit grandmother's house anymore. I arranged to meet them at a park halfway between our homes, with Madison present, so I could explain in age-appropriate terms that I had moved to a new home, but still loved them just as much. Emma asked if she could come visit my new apartment, and I promised her that she could as soon as we worked out the arrangements with her parents. I wanted my grandchildren to be part of my new life, but only in a way that felt healthy and honest for everyone involved. No more family gatherings, where adults were secretly plotting against each other while children played innocently nearby. My new life in Riverside was everything I had hoped it would be, and more. I joined the book club and discovered a love for mystery novels that I had never explored before. I started taking water aerobics classes and made friends with women who shared my interests in gardening and traveling. I even began volunteering at the local animal shelter, which gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing since Robert's death. The independence I had fought so hard to protect turned out to be even more precious than I had realized. Every decision I made was entirely my own, from what time I got up in the morning to what I wanted to have for dinner. No one questioned my choices or suggested that I was becoming incompetent. No one treated me like a burden or an obstacle to their own happiness. 3 months after my move, Madison asked if she could come visit my apartment. I agreed, but I also made it clear that the visit would be on my terms, and that any attempt to criticize my choices or suggest changes to my lifestyle would end the visit immediately. When she arrived, she seemed genuinely impressed by my new home and my obvious contentment with my decision. We spent the afternoon talking more honestly than we had in years. Madison admitted that she had been scared about their financial future and had convinced herself that taking control of my assets was somehow helping everyone involved. She acknowledged that Tyler had been more aggressive about the nursing home plan than she had initially admitted, and that she had allowed herself to go along with it because it seemed like an easy solution to their money problems. The healing process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was real progress. Madison started calling me more regularly, not to check up on my mental state or question my decisions, but just to share news about the children or ask my advice about things that mattered to her. She also started standing up to Tyler when he made comments about my choices or suggested that I was making mistakes by living independently. Tyler and I eventually had a conversation that resembled an apology, though I do not think he ever truly understood how deeply his actions had hurt me. He seemed to view the whole situation as a business deal that had gone wrong rather than a betrayal of family trust. But he stopped making comments about my lifestyle, and he treated me with basic respect when we were together for family events. The most important outcome of everything that happened was not the preservation of my assets, or even the protection of my independence, though both of those things mattered enormously. The most important outcome was the discovery of my own strength and resilience. I learned that I could handle crisis and betrayal without falling apart. I learned that I could make major life changes successfully even in my late 50s. And I learned that I did not need anyone's permission or approval to live my life on my own terms. My new life in Riverside has been full of discoveries and adventures that I never would have experienced if I had allowed myself to be manipulated into a nursing home. I have traveled to places I always wanted to see, made friends with people who appreciate my mind and my spirit, and built a daily routine that brings me joy and satisfaction. Most importantly, I have maintained my dignity and my autonomy, which are worth more than any house or any amount of money. The relationship with my daughter will never be exactly what it was before, because innocence once lost cannot be completely restored. But it has become something different, and in some ways more honest. Madison now knows that I am not someone who can be taken advantage of or controlled. I now know that I must always be vigilant about protecting my own interests, even from people who claim to love me. As for the grandchildren, they now know their grandmother as someone who lives in a beautiful apartment with a swimming pool and organized activities, someone who chose her own adventure rather than accepting what others thought was best for her. Emma has told me that she wants to be like me when she gets older, independent and brave enough to make her own decisions. That might be the greatest compliment I have ever received. Looking back on the whole experience, I am grateful for the lesson it taught me about the importance of trusting my own instincts and standing up for myself, even when it means disappointing people I love. I am grateful for the discovery that being alone does not mean being lonely, and that starting over in your 50s can be an exciting adventure rather than a defeat. Most of all, I am grateful that I was strong enough to save myself from a fate that would have destroyed my spirit and stolen my remaining years. No one should have to spend their golden years in a place they did not choose, stripped of their independence by people who claim to know what is best for them. Everyone deserves the right to make their own choices about how to live and where to call home, regardless of their age or family relationships. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who thought they knew what was best for you? Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were working against your best interests? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of protecting our independence and dignity at every stage of life. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories about the strength and resilience that we all carry within us, even when we feel most vulnerable. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that it is never too late to take control of your own destiny. May you always have the courage to choose your own path and the wisdom to know when someone is trying to lead you astray.